As well as being an expert on money matters, did you know that Which also has a team of experts in various aspects of UK law? The Which Legal Advice Service gives its members access to this team, allowing them to get advice on a range of legal matters that impact consumers' everyday lives. And right now, you can join the Which Legal Advice Service and save 30% off the usual annual price. So whether it's a rental dispute, a last-minute holiday cancellation, or legal employment advice, Which can give you personalised one-to-one advice in a simple, convenient and affordable manner. Don't struggle in silence or suffer the stress of wading through endless streams of online information from unreliable sources. Join online and book your appointment to speak to one of our experts to get the advice and guidance you need, tailored to you. Plus, right now, you can join and get legal support from Which for a whole year for just £69.30, a saving of 30%. Just go to which.co.uk/legal advice to find out more, or click the link in the podcast show notes. This offer ends on the 31st of August, so don't miss out.
When life gives you questions, Which? Get answers.
Welcome to the Which Money Podcast, your weekly hit of money news and personal finance hacks to help make you better off. I'm your host, Lucia Ariano, and here's what's coming up this week.
I think those people who say they think they know what they'll need to spend in retirement, a lot of those will probably be wrong.
I mean, other savings goals in your life, like saving for a holiday or saving for your house deposit, they're just a bit more specific. Retirement is so much more sort of daunting and abstract, and it's sort of a, how long is a piece of string type question.
This week, we're going to be looking at your pension pot. Now, research from us here at Which suggests around half of adults don't know how much money they'll need come retirement. So what is the answer, and how can you ensure you achieve it? Well, to help us answer these questions and so many more, we're joined by Jenny Ross, the editor of Which Money, and Tom Selby, Director of Public Policy at AJ Bell. Both familiar voices here on the show. Thank you both so much for coming back on.
Great to be here.
Hello.
Hi.
Well, shall we start with that statistic then? It's quite striking, isn't it?
It is, but I've got to say, I don't think it's all that surprising. And actually, I've seen other sort of similar surveys out there that put the figure closer to 80%. So I think, it's fair to say this is something that people struggle with, and it's easy to see why, really, because when you think about, other savings goals in your life, like saving for a holiday or saving for your house deposit, they're quite, first of all, they're shorter term than saving for retirement, but also they're just a bit more specific. They're more concrete. I'll need £1,000 for my flights plus accommodation. Retirement is so much more sort of daunting and abstract, and it's sort of a, how long is a piece of string type question. And if you're even further away from retirement, that job's going to be even harder. It's harder to predict how your spending habits might change once you stop working. There are things like your commute, which you won't be doing anymore. You might no longer be paying a mortgage. So yeah, it's just a challenge of sort of projecting that much further into the future and thinking about what your life will look like once you've finished work.
And Tom, what do you make of it? Is there anything you'd add on, why it's come to this?
I think those people who say they think they know what they'll need to spend in retirement, a lot of those will probably be wrong. So part of the challenge is firstly that this is something that's way into the future. As you said, you don't know whether you're going to have a mortgage to pay off or not, for example. That'll be really difficult. You also don't know when you're going to retire, probably, particularly when you're in your 20s and your 30s. You don't know what your health conditions are going to be. You might not even know exactly what the state pension's going to look like. So I think they are quite striking findings, but I'd say there's going to be as much people who are wrong on the side who say they think they've got enough money and they know what they need to spend in retirement as those who say that they don't know exactly what they're going to spend in retirement. So I think it just goes to show how tricky it is to plan that far into the future.
So I feel like we've just set the scene. It's a very confusing picture. So shall we get into it then? Jenny, do you want to start us off on how you might be able to work out how much money you'll need in retirement?
Yes, well, as I think we've just made clear, this is obviously not an exact science. There are many different factors at play, many unknowns that you just can't really account for. But I think the main thing to get you started is just to think about the type of lifestyle that you want. What are the types of things that you want to be doing when you stop working, and how far will your money get you? If you want to be going on exotic holidays every single year, or buying a new car every few years. Things like that will help to make those calculations that much more simple. But I think another useful starting point is a set of figures produced by an organisation called the Pension and Lifetime Savings Association. Now, they've come up with 3 retirement living standards, is what they call them. And those are basically 3 numbers to give you an idea of the annual income you'll need for 3 different levels of retirement lifestyle. So minimum, moderate and comfortable is what they call those different levels. So for a single person, the PLSA puts the figure for a minimum retirement lifestyle at $14,000 a year. That then goes up to $31,000 for its moderate retirement living standard and $43,000 for what it calls its comfortable living standard. Now, for couples, there are equivalent figures. They start from $22,000 for minimum, $43,000 for moderate, and $59,000 for comfortable. Each of those standards is basically calculated kind of like, we're used to hearing about with inflation, a basket of goods and services. So things like household bills, obviously, groceries, eating out, holidays, transport, and so on. And obviously, the more money you have, the further that money's going to stretch. Crucially, what those numbers don't factor in, it's worth thinking about, is rent and mortgage costs. And I think that's fair enough, because I think these days most older people won't be having to factor those costs in. But we know that the number of people in later life who are still going to be renting or still going to be paying a mortgage is likely to grow in future years. So that is something worth factoring in. Also, obviously, these numbers will change every year. The PLSA reviews them every year. They go up with inflation. They factor in current prices. So it's no use if you're 25 now and thinking, OK, I want a comfortable retirement. Let me make sure I can afford £43,000 a year, because by the time you reach retirement, that number is going to be way up. So it really is just a guide, basically.
And I want to come back to these, but before we dive a bit deeper into those figures, Tom, can we just talk a little bit about how and when you can access your pension?
Yeah, sure. So if we're talking about defined contribution pensions here, so those are pensions where you build up a pot of money and then it's up to you to turn that into an income in retirement. So at the moment, you can access those pensions from age 55. You can access up to a quarter of it tax-free, and the rest is taxed in the same way as income. Now, that minimum access age is going to go up to 57 in 2028. So that's something that's important to remember. Of course, 55 or 57 is really early to be accessing your pension. So it is a change, but it isn't a change that should really massively impact too many people. In terms of the way you can take an income, so there's broadly 3 options. So you can go into drawdown. So that means that you take a flexible income from your pension to suit your needs while keeping your money invested. You can hand over your pot to an insurance company and buy what's called an annuity. So that's a guaranteed income for life that will last until you die. And then you can also take what are called ad hoc lump sums, or UFPLS in the annoying pensions jargon. Don't blame me, HMRC created the term. But that's just essentially where you just take a chunk of your pension out, a quarter of that chunk is tax-free, and the rest of the chunk, so 75%, is taxed in the same way as income. And crucially, you don't just have to take one of those options. So you can mix and match those options. For example, for lots of people, the right solution will be going into drawdown, taking a flexible income until they're a bit older, and then perhaps buying an annuity with the rest of the pot when they're a bit older and they can get a better rate. But you can mix and match to suit your needs.
Okay, so shall we come back to those figures then and talk about how we get there? How much do we need to be saving? Jenny, where would you start us off on that?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because even if you've got a clearish number in your head of how much income you would like every year in retirement, you need to then figure out, okay, how much do I need overall in my savings to generate that amount each year? So to give you a rough sense based on those figures I just ran through, we've basically worked backwards from those targets to calculate how much you're likely to need in your private pensions to reach them, depending on how you access your money. As Tom said, you've got the option of drawdown or annuity. Now, if you're living alone and you're opting for an annuity, you'll need around £407,000 in your pot to achieve the moderate living standard of around £31,000 a year. With drawdown, it's slightly lower, it's £375,000. Now, it's important to remember that you are going to get some help towards your desired retirement income target in the form of the state pension. So the figures that I just mentioned, we've assumed that you get the full level of new state pension, which is currently £11,500 a year. Obviously, there's so many caveats here, aren't there? But yes, you might not get that much. In fact, few people get that exact amount. It all depends on your national insurance record.
And
basically.
It's interesting because just to flag, that's less than the lowest bracket we're talking about, which I think was around 14,000.
Exactly. Yeah, that is a really good point, Lucia. Yeah, based on the PLSA's figure, as a single person, you need £14,000 for the minimum standard of living in retirement. And yes, the state pension, even if you get that full amount, it's not going to get you all of the way there. So I think most of us know this already, but if you can possibly avoid it, don't be relying on the state pension for all of your income in retirement. Obviously, it provides a very valuable and important component to most people's retirement incomes, but yeah, you will really need to bolster that with money you've saved in your private pot.
And so what does that look like in terms of how much you'd need to save per month, say if you're starting in your 20s, your 30s, 40s, whenever you're starting?
Yeah, I want to sort of preface this by saying over the course of your working life, you're not going to be saving exactly the same amount in your pension every single month. Things are going to ebb and flow, as you move through your career, you hopefully get pay rises. Maybe you need to take some time off work in which you won't be contributing. So we have done some calculations based on how much you would need to contribute on a regular basis. But yeah, these do need to be taken with a healthy pinch of salt. So again, let's use the moderate living standard from the PLSA, that target of around £31,000 as our starting point. So if you're aiming for that and you're going to be accessing your pot via drawdown, so you're aiming for a pot overall of around £375,000. If you are currently age 20, so right at the very beginning of your career, and you've got no pension savings at all at the moment, in order to meet that target by the time you reach state pension age, which for you will be 68, it's currently 66, but as we know, it's going up, you'd be looking at saving around £471 in your pot each month. If you are 30, that would go up to £612 a month because you are that much closer to state pension age. And obviously, and if you're 50 starting from scratch, hopefully you wouldn't be. But yeah, it'd be quite a hefty target of around £1,400 a month in your pension. The main message here is that the earlier you start saving, the better, because you won't have that panic stations, need to put in a lot, maybe more than you can afford, very close to retirement. You'll also have so much more time to benefit from investment growth, because that's how defined contribution pensions work, right? You pay your money in, that money gets invested, and over time, hopefully your pot will be worth a lot more than it was when you started. So yeah, exactly how much you save depends on your age, your circumstances, how much you're earning, when you're planning to retire, how much you've already saved. But those are very rough indicators. The final point here is that those numbers I've just thrown at you, they include pension tax relief. So we'll come on to that because it really deserves its own spotlight. But this is what's special about pensions as opposed to an ordinary savings account, is when you put money in, that money gets boosted by the government in the form of pension tax relief. And that will all roll up and add to hopefully you reaching your desired retirement income target.
Well, I've got to say, when you said those figures, I felt like wincing because it does sound like a lot, doesn't it? But as you say, it's not as bad as it sounds. So we've got pension tax relief to talk about and also employer contributions. Mm-hmm. Tom, do you want to tackle those two?
Yeah, so upfront pensions tax relief, a really valuable incentive to save for retirement. So you don't have to pay income tax on the contributions you pay in. So you automatically get a 25% boost on the money that you put in. If you're a higher or an additional rate taxpayer, then you can get extra tax relief, claim that back from the taxman as well. So a really good incentive to save for retirement. As you say, you also have the benefit of matched employer contributions within the workplace. So you'll get a minimum of 3% from your employer paid into your pension scheme. Lots of employers offer more generous terms than that. So it's worth speaking to your employer if you haven't already to make sure that you're getting as much from your employer as you possibly can, because that's all calculated into your overall remuneration, so your overall pay package. And I think one of the key things around all these numbers, because I think it's really useful, these PLSA numbers, but you can end up with a kind of gargantuan target, and I've spoken to a lot of friends about this. I apologise to those friends for bringing up pensions in the pub, but you can reach this number of £400,000-500,000, and people often just kind of throw their hands up and go, how on earth can I reach that target? Now, firstly, as you say, Jenny, if you do it over a long period of time and break it down into small chunks, then it's much more manageable. But secondly, any money that you save in a pension, firstly, will benefit from tax relief, and you get those matched employer contributions as well. So even if you're not reaching some of these goals, even if you're a bit later in life, then any contribution to a pension is going to be a good investment and something that is going to go towards your future lifestyle in retirement.
And so taking into account then pension tax relief and your employer contributing to the amount you're putting away each month, how much might that look coming out of your pay packet?
Yeah, so it sounds like an easy question, but like all things in pensions, it isn't. But if you think, for example, of someone who's earning around £40,000 a year, say overall they get 10% going into their pension, so 5% from their employer, 5% from their employee. If they're looking to get down to that £400 a month figure, then it'll be roughly half and half. So you'd have about £200 inclusive of the tax relief going in from the employee, so slightly less upfront, and then the boost of tax relief, and then you get the extra amount coming in from their employer. So it's these kind of things that can make those monthly amounts much more manageable. So £400 can sound way too much, but actually if you're getting half it from your employer and a bit more from tax relief, then it all of a sudden looks a bit more manageable than perhaps it would do otherwise.
Absolutely. Now, it really does sound a lot more manageable when you put it like that. Well, after a quick break, we'll be back with more on auto-enrolment, as well as how to manage your potentially multiple pension pots.
If you're enjoying this podcast from us here at Which, then why not become a Which member? Right now, we've got a special offer, especially for podcast listeners, meaning you can choose any of our 3 membership tiers for 50% off the usual price. Starting at just £39.50 for a full year, you can get Which magazine delivered direct to your door. For the same price, you could also choose a digital Which subscription, giving you access to all of our product reviews, the Which app, and the digital edition of Which magazine. What's more, you'll also be able to use the Ask Which service for personalised one-to-one buying advice. Or why not get a full access Which subscription for just £49.50 for a full year? Don't forget, that's 50% off the usual price. To join Which or to find out more, just head to which.co.uk/podcast offer. That's which.co.uk/podcast offer, or click the link in the description for today's podcast for 50% off a Which annual subscription.
Welcome back to the show. Well, can we pick up again with auto-enrolment? So there have been calls to increase the minimum contributions because of concerns people aren't saving enough. If you want to pay more than the minimum, you can, can't you, Jenny?
You absolutely can, and if you can afford to, then you should, because as we know, it will make a big difference. So as Tom says, the minimum contributions under auto enrolment is a total of 8% of your salary. So that's 3% coming from your employer and 5% coming from you. But you're well within your rights to approach your employer or your pension scheme and to bump up those contributions coming from you. And if your employer does match them, then win-win. That's even more going into your pot. But there are concerns that figure of 8% is just not enough. So there are plenty of organisations calling for that auto-enrolment minimum to be bumped up to around the 12% mark. But I think increasing your pension contributions for many people, it's not top of their list of financial priorities, especially if they're earlier on in their career. But it is worth thinking about, because even just very, very minor increases can make a big difference over the long term because of investment growth, as we talked about. And if you've got years to go until you're retired, then that will really help you out. I saw some Standard Life had some helpful calculations that showed that increasing your contributions from the minimum of 5% just to 6%, so you're really not going to notice a huge difference. That's going to generate a pension pot overall of £488,000 by the time you get to 66, and that's a difference of over 50k. So wow. It's not insignificant. I think pay rises are a really perfect time to think about this, because then you're even less likely to notice the difference of, you know, that extra contribution coming out of your pay packet. So yeah, do have a look at how much you're currently paying in, whether your employer matches it, and whether you can afford to just give that little bit extra to your future self.
And can we also talk about keeping on top of your pension pot? So I've got here that people have on average 11 jobs in their lifetime. So in theory, they could have 11 different pots. Now, I feel like we often come back to this question, but are there any concrete plans to simplify this, Tom?
So there are plans in train to make it easier for you to locate all your old pension pots. So as you say, it's much more common now for people to have multiple jobs. It's possible that with each one of those jobs, you build up another pension. That's not ideal when you come to retirement. It's much easier if you've got everything in one place so you can plan around it and turn it into an income. So there are a couple of plans in train. So the first one, and I know we've talked about this before, is pensions dashboards. It's been in train since about 2019.
Feels like a mythical creature now, doesn't it?
We
really exist.
Well, I know. We were all expecting it to happen sooner than it has, but those should be coming in place in the next couple of years. So that will mean that you'll be able to see all of your pension pots in one place online. So that should then make it easier, if you choose to, for you to consolidate those pots in a single place. At the moment, we don't have that, but there are lots of services out there where you can just kind of put in your employers, some details of your old employers, and find those old pensions, and then those providers will potentially help you consolidate your pensions with them or with someone else. So there are plans in place to deal with the small props problem, but in the meantime, it's up to you to go out and do the donkey work or get a provider to do it for you.
And is that something that our listeners, that you and I should be doing, consolidating our pots now?
So it will depend on your circumstances. So there are some dangers sometimes to consolidating pensions. So for example, generally this is something that's more associated with older types of pensions. So pensions that were sold in the 90s and the 2000s, but you can have pensions that have valuable guarantees attached. So things like guaranteed annuity rates, where if you transfer your pension, then you'll potentially lose that guarantee. So that's something to be aware of. But generally, certainly for more modern pensions, those kind of features don't exist. And there are lots of potential benefits to combining your pensions. So the main one for most people is it's just easier. It's a bit of a nightmare to have 11. No, you don't have 11 different bank accounts most of the time. Why would you have 11 different pension accounts? So having them all in one place makes it easier, A, to know what you've got, and B, to know what you potentially need to add to it, and then C, to know what you want to do with it in retirement. So there are benefits to doing it, and for lots of people it is an attractive course of action, particularly when you're approaching retirement. So if you're in your 20s and 30s, it's probably not a massive priority for you right now, but certainly once you get into your 50s, perhaps into your 60s, having everything in one place is just much, much easier.
And just before we move on, is this something that we should be doing given the pension dashboard might be coming in the next couple of years?
So it's something that you can do off your own bat anyway. So nobody should. So as we said earlier, the pensions dashboard's been in train for quite a while. We are assuming it's going to come in place in the next couple of years, but there are no guarantees. And clearly, particularly if you're approaching retirement now, then you don't want to wait around for some government thing to be created. So there are services out there. Like I say, there are private pension providers, AJ Bell and others that offer services where you can just put in your employer's details, and then they'll find all your old pensions for you. So you can do that today using some of the services that exist. It will be easier when the pension dashboard exists, but that may take a couple of years, if not longer. We just don't know.
And Jenny, this is something that we've been campaigning for a while, isn't it? Obviously, we've talked about it on the show, making it easier to know what's going on with your pensions and manage them all.
Yeah, absolutely, and for good reason, as Tom says, because it can be a total minefield at the moment, and that creates such a big barrier to actually just engaging with your pension and thinking about what your income is going to look like in retirement. Too many people give up at the first hurdle. They say, "Oh God, I can't even find all of the details of all my different pots, so I'll park that until I can face it again," and it just gets pushed further down the line. And actually, if people had that information up front in an easy to digest way, they would maybe the penny dropping moment would happen earlier. They'd think, "Oh, maybe I'm not on track for the type of income I want. Maybe I can do something about this now before there's less time to make a difference. So yeah, it's definitely long overdue. But as Tom says, if you are up for a little bit more effort and are prepared to put in a bit of legwork now, it can definitely pay off in the shape of sort of easier admin and maybe even, a boost to your pension.
So if someone listening, might be thinking, okay, I'm ready to put in a bit of legwork, and hopefully there are many of you out there, what's your advice on how to keep across your pension pots now?
I think the starting point, especially if you have had a lot of jobs and therefore a lot of separate pension pots that are now lying around, is to identify all of those. I know it sounds really obvious, but you might not have even remembered that the first job you had came with a pension. You might have no idea how much is sitting in that. So I would start with your own mini dashboard, literally just making a list of which jobs you've held, checking if you had a pension with them, and trying to make contact with that scheme to find out how much is in there, and other crucial details like charges, for example. Don't forget, we pay money to keep our money in these pension schemes, and those charges can vary. So yeah, definitely track down all of your lost pots. There is the government runs a free pension tracing service as well. If you can't even remember the name of your pension provider, you can give the details of your employer and hopefully track those down. But yeah, I'd start with a list of pension provider names and the value of your pot in each case.
And is there anything you'd add to that, Tom?
No, I think that's all very sensible. I think if you can remember to, when you're going through your career, keeping hold of your pension statements, or at least making a note of the pension provider you're with and the details and things like that, that can make it a whole lot easier. Obviously, we're hoping that government reforms are going to come forward that will make that less necessary for you in the future. But for the time being, if you can keep all those details, it makes it a lot easier. And as you say, the pension tracing service exists to help find some of your pension, the details of your old employers if you want to. And as I say, there are private services out there, including one offered by AJ Bell, I should say, that helps you find your old pensions just by putting in a few details. So there are ways to do it now before we get a pensions dashboard.
And you should make sure your details are up. Once you found their details, make sure your details are up to date with them, because you could even have paper statements going to an old address, things like that. It can get really messy. So yeah, just a bit of housekeeping will go a long way.
It's one of those classic things, just doing a little bit of admin each time you switch jobs. It might feel like a bit of a pain, but it'll save you a whole lot more pain when you get towards retirement.
It's one of those things, isn't it? You wish they'd told you that in school before you did have your first job. Well, before we wrap up then, is there anything else that you'd mention, any kind of final bits of advice? We've covered so much, and of course pensions are such a huge topic, but is there anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with? We've
focused a lot on private pensions, obviously, because that's going to make a huge difference to your retirement. It's what we all have control over. But of course, don't forget about the state pension. You can get a forecast from the government website to check roughly how much you could expect to get. If you're a long way off state pension age, obviously it's much harder to predict because the state pension goes up every year. But just remember that is there, and try to get your head around how the national insurance system works as well. If you're worried that you will have gaps or you have had gaps, you can pay to fill those, but you need to figure out whether it's worth your while. But there's lots of information on the government website.
And I'd just say, Jenny touched on it earlier, but starting saving as early as you possibly can is the easiest way to get towards some of these big targets. Don't be put off by scary numbers that are out there. Those numbers are there to help you, but they're not supposed to be there to terrify you from saving for retirement. Sit down, write down a budget is the thing that I always say to people to start with, because sometimes you can think that you've got no spare money whatsoever and you just can't save anything for retirement. So write yourself down a budget, think about if there's anything that you can cut out of that to save for retirement. Absolutely, your first port of call should be your automatic enrolment workplace scheme, where you get those employer contributions. You want to make sure you're getting those, because otherwise you're effectively taking a voluntary pay cut. And then once you've got that in place, you've got your rainy day pot in place, so you can then start to think about whether you can increase those contributions either today or over time as your salary goes up.
And it doesn't necessarily need to be an ongoing commitment either, does it? One-off contributions are just as worthwhile. If you get a bonus and you want to put some of that towards your pension. And also, even if you do commit to increasing your contributions slightly, you can reverse that if you need to, if circumstances change. Don't feel so daunted, that you need to commit to this over the long term. Just do it today. Change it next week if you need to, but at least you'll have done it, and that will make a difference.
Well, it's been a super helpful show today, and hopefully we've made some of those numbers a little less scary. Thank you both, Tom and Jenny, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, a huge thank you again to Jenny and Tom for coming on the show today, and to you for listening to this week's episode of the Which Money podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please do hit subscribe to make sure you catch our new episodes as soon as they drop. For daily money news and advice, you can find us on social media at Which Money and online at which.co.uk/money. And we also have a free money newsletter, which is delivered to your inbox every Monday. To sign up, visit which.co.uk/money newsletter. This episode of the Which Money podcast was written and presented by me, Lucia Ariano, and produced and edited by James Rowe.
If you're enjoying this Which podcast, then you might also be interested in listening to other podcasts that we have to offer, like Which Shorts. Which Short is our weekly podcast that brings you a flavour of what the Which magazine has to offer, as well as our dedicated travel, gardening and tech magazines too. Each week we handpick a review, investigation or feature that was printed in one of our magazines and written by one of our award-winning writers. We then bring it to life on the podcast. So to get a taster of what Which members get in our suite of magazines, be sure to listen to Which Shorts wherever you get your podcasts.